April 6th, 1936. In the past 24 hours, a violent tornado outbreak has torn across the southeastern United States, claiming hundreds of lives, of which included a massive F5 twister in Tupelo, Mississippi, one that took the lives of over 216, one of the deadliest in United States history. But like many volatile severe weather setups, the atmosphere wasn't entirely finished. This story isn't just about the devastation of one singular town in Georgia on that fateful day. It serves as a cautionary tale, one of the earliest reminders of how vulnerable American workers were in the face of natural disaster during the early and mid-20th century. Today, we revisit Gainesville to remember a town's tragedy and turning point. Not just the devastation the tornado itself left, but what it showed us about workplace safety, how we've improved since, and what challenges we still face. This is the story of the unforgettable 1936 Gainesville, Georgia tornado. In 1936 Gainesville, Georgia was a growing industrial and textile hub, nestled in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Originally known as Mule Camp Springs, the town of Gainesville would officially be chartered in 1821 and saw a massive influx as the gold rush of Lumpkin County brought new settlers and thriving businesses. Over the next century, Gainesville would see a rapid increase of growth and subsequent growing pains, from railway openings and the beginnings of economic prosperity thanks to the textile industry, to the establishment of the Georgia Baptist Female Seminary, now known as Brunel University. Though none of this prosperity was without its fair share of hardship. From fires destroying a large number of businesses in its early establishment, to an F4 tornado striking the young town and taking over 100 lives. Gainesville, by this point in 1936, had already seen some adversity, and it is with this setting that we now begin our story. The fateful day of April 6th of 1936. It's the early morning hours of April 6th. The residents of Gainesville are up early, ready to begin their working week, all of which are unaware of the extremely volatile atmospheric setup brewing just above them. This same volatility in the past 24 hours has wreaked havoc across parts of the South, particularly in northern Mississippi and the Tennessee Valley, where multiple strong to violent tornadoes, including an F4 and an F5, struck Tupelo, Mississippi, and Hardin, Tennessee. As with many of these extremely volatile severe weather setups, one day alone was not enough for the atmosphere to fully release its fury. The environment remained primed for more violent storms. Only this time, the atmosphere didn't wait until the afternoon. The sky begins to darken, and by 8:20 a.m., what's described as 3 separate storms move towards the town's center. The first of which moved through areas near Brunel College, points east to New Holland. Then, only 10 minutes later, 2 distinct funnel-shaped clouds appeared at once. To onlookers, multiple eyewitnesses noting that the funnels converged as they descended upon the unsuspecting town. The impact of the storms lasted only minutes, yet caused inconceivable damage. From the first reported funnel, moving from Brunel College points east, 1/3 of the campus and some residential areas near New Holland. The 2 remaining funnels, however, were noted as having unleashed, quote, the greatest destruction and sorrow as they tore through the heart of downtown Gainesville. Clocks at the Citizens Bank stopped at 8:27 a.m., frozen forever at the moment of disaster. Entire neighborhoods, in upwards of 750 homes, were reduced to splinters of wood. Water systems, communication lines, and the entire power grid were wiped completely out. The Gainesville City Hall and County Courthouse were toppled, and businesses in the downtown center were either completely leveled or damaged beyond repair within minutes. One of the businesses impacted, and the greatest tragedy of the story, comes from the Cooper Pants Factory. Inside the Cooper Pants Factory, hundreds of workers, mostly women, were inside the multi-story brick building as the tornado bore down on the corner of West Broad and Maple Street. While many women and children had moved to the basement of the building to shelter from the storm, the building collapsed on top of them and now trapped them underneath the rubble. And it would be in this immediate aftermath of the toppled Cooper Pants Factory that a fire would break out. Flames trapped over half of the factory's 125 employees, again mostly young women and girls, and as many as 70 of them would lose their lives in the fire after having survived the initial tornado. This would be the greatest single contributor to the over 200 fatalities that occurred from the Gainesville tornado. In addition to the deaths at the Cooper factory, some 20 high school students and workers lost their lives in the Noonan department store as well. To have over 200 deaths from a singular tornado, 70 of which occurred in one building alone, is an absolutely abhorrent figure even for the early to mid 20th century. This fatality count means that not only does this tornado remain the deadliest in Georgia's state history, the fatalities that occurred at the Cooper Pants Factory were the largest death toll in a single building for any U.S. tornado, and it remains so. And this tragedy is not an isolated story for this historical period. It echoed earlier disasters. Take, for example, the Great Natchez tornado of 1840, which killed dozens, if not hundreds, of river workers, and the 1911 Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in New York, where more than 140 young women and immigrants lost their lives behind locked doors. Gainesville became just another entry in this grim history, proof that when safety is neglected, disaster turns fatal. But this wasn't a town that would allow itself to remain paralyzed by grief or shame. This very rage led to what was about to become Gainesville's incredible resolve to rebuild. With a new lease on life, Gainesville wasted no time in rebuilding, now with a determination to become stronger, safer, and better prepared for the future. Much of the rebuilding effort would focus on improvement, not only cleaning up the devastation of the old buildings, but bringing them back better than before, building homes stronger, incorporating a higher quality roadway, and adding parks and schools where needed. President Franklin D. Roosevelt visited the town amidst the initial cleanup period, assisting with local resources and donations and assistance that were already pouring in from across the state and country. The president also assured federal assistance would be distributed, of which would ultimately include $2.5 million in immediate relief for what was being called the Tupelo-Gainesville tornado outbreak. After 2 years of incessant rebuilding and improvement of the town, by 1938, Gainesville was mostly recovered, coming back better than ever. With the rebuilding of homes, implementation of better streets, parks, and schools, and the addition of new civic buildings, Gainesville showed its absolute tenacity. The new downtown would now include a new courthouse, city hall, public library, and a fire station. And it would be during this very triumphant period 2 years later in 1938, on March 23rd of that year, that President FDR would come back to revisit the revitalized town of Gainesville in its celebration of its rebirth. The people of Gainesville were not content to clear away debris. FDR states, "You were not content with rebuilding along the lines of the old community or throwing yourselves on the help of which could be given to you by your state and government. On the contrary, you determined in the process of rebuilding to eliminate old conditions of which you were not proud, to build a better city." Gainesville suffered a great disaster and showed a united front for the good of its whole population, good and poor alike. it rose to rebuild on sounder lines. The United States, too, is rising and rebuilding on sounder lines. We propose to go forward and not to go back. And so this speech, given by FDR on this day of March 23rd, birthed the slogan, "The Good People of Gainesville." The Roosevelt Square in the town center today is still named in his honor and in honor of this incredible speech. Now, aside from having this immense amount of positivity and regrowth and the spirit of rebirth, I'd also be remiss if I didn't speak about some of the darker aspects of this story. It would be after the tornado in 1936 that Gainesville's Black community would be relocated. This community, known as Newtown, would be relocated to segregated housing built on a landfill surrounded by railroad tracks, which were additionally surrounded by very industrious areas. This industrious area, on top of a landfill, mind you, was full of various pollutants. It would be in the 1950s, however, over a decade after the tornado, that local women would form the Newtown Florist Club, originally to care for the sick and support funerals, but it eventually grew into a force for civil rights and later environmental justice. While in the initial decades after the tornado, these deaths and sicknesses and cancers from pollutants were only suspected by the community, it would be in the 1990s that residents began to face unusually high rates of cancer, lupus, and respiratory illness, which they were able to officially link to the toxic exposure from nearby factories and waste sites. The Florist Club and its leaders challenged industry, demanded accountability from officials, and fought for their community relentlessly for the health and dignity of the members of Newtown, making them a symbol of resilience and grassroots activism in the face of systematic neglect. This was not the first and wouldn't be the last time that Black or other minority communities were significantly and systematically hurt by the systems in place meant to help in our time of need. And unfortunately, systematic neglect is a topic that we still have to cover to this very day. We just passed the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, one of, if not the most tragic examples of this concept in modern times. This topic will be an entire video essay of its own, by the way, so if you have literature or studies, statistics of any kind that you want me to read, books of any kind, please drop them below for me in the comments. I would love to check them out. Almost 100 years later, workplaces today are much better prepared for disaster than they were in 1936. We have tornado warnings, sirens, and emergency alert systems to provide critical minutes of lead time. Many factories and offices have designated storm shelters, conduct safety drills, and rely on technology to instantly communicate during emergencies. But that's not to say that challenges don't remain. Many large warehouses, retail stores, and factories still leave workers vulnerable when it comes to storms striking. Recent tragedies, from the collapse of a candle factory in Mayfield, Kentucky, to reports of workers unable to seek shelter in major distribution centers, in addition to several fatalities, show that shortcomings still very much persist. I say all of this, and I harp on this point in part because of my own personal experience as a 19-year-old working an overnight shift in a factory from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. before getting out to do college classes, and having been under a tornado warning in a confirmed EF2 tornado that tore through my hometown. I remember being huddled in the bathroom at the time, surrounded by heavy machinery and equipment just outside of those walls, and thinking about the structural integrity of that bathroom, and wondering that if this tornado was really going to hit, how it would hold up to the winds. And while, of course, It did turn out okay, and I'm very thankful for the structural integrity of that building. It does call into question, what if something like that were to happen again to a major factory? So while it's true that enormous progress has been made in workplace safety since 1936, of course, we can never be content to say that the work is finished. It is not. The 1936 tornado remains one of the deadliest in American history. It remains the deadliest in Georgia's state history, and the loss of life at the Cooper Pants factory reminds us of the enormous stakes at play when workers have no safe place to run. Nearly a century later, the echoes of the Gainesville tragedy continue to guide how we think about protecting employees during severe weather. Retelling the story of the Gainesville tornado and the Cooper Pants factory isn't only about remembering the lives lost and honoring the past. It's about ensuring that this doesn't happen again in the future. Nearly 90 years after the tornado, Gainesville has, of course, fully rebuilt and redefined itself. What was once a shattered downtown is now a thriving center of commerce, industry, and community. The city is known today as the poultry capital of the world, home to major employers, a growing healthcare sector, and a diverse population that has steadily expanded through the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Yet traces of 1936 still remain. Monuments, historical markers, and oral histories preserve the memory of hundreds of lives lost and changed forever. For longtime residents, the Cooper Pants factory and the devastation of downtown are not so much distant history, but part of the city's identity. A reminder of resilience, forged in tragedy. Pierce Hancock was 13 when the tornado struck Gainesville, and he never forgot the fury of those storms. The tiny rosebush that survived the wrath of the storm had been replanted at every home Pierce had lived in since, as a reminder of its survival, even when Pierce's own 17-year-old brother, Sewell, didn't. Pierce thought of his brother every time he saw the bush, and no matter how much time passed, he never forgot the storm. Though Pierce and the other survivors of the storm aren't with us anymore, like the bush, we must honor and care for their memories so that their stories and lessons can live on. I hope you took something from this story today, and until next time. So that their stores, what was that? So that their stores, how many times am I going to say stores? For their memories. Oh, what is happening? Thank God this is my last line. Landscape of their once. How do you say it again?
At Brunel University.
Brunel. Meep. Next tile. Beep, are you going to keep eating over there? Yeah, okay. Y'all make so much noise for cats. Gotta figure out how to say that. That is a sin that is unforgivable in my own state.
At
Brunel University. All right. I did my homework. Okay, so I am currently in Gainesville getting some footage of the tornado memorials downtown, and naturally, as one does, I decided to ask the locals about the Gainesville tornado history and if they had any additional insight. And I spoke to one person who said, well, yeah, this all sounds great. Did you know about the tunnels? The tunnels? No, I didn't know about the tunnels. Tell me more, please. So they proceed to tell me that there are underground tunnels in the city of Gainesville underneath that people can have access to, I guess, or maybe sneak into, and that they were actually used during the cleanup process of the Gainesville tornado. So naturally my interest is piqued, and I decide to quickly get online and see if I can find any additional information about these tunnels. And I see that they exist, and it appears to be that they had started to be built during the pre-Civil War era into the Civil War era. But I couldn't find any additional information on them in regards to the tornadoes and the tornado cleanup process, but I am certainly very intrigued. They exist. I don't know to the extent of which they exist or to the extent of which they were used during the 1936 tornado cleanup process, but I'm dying to find out more. If I can't find out any more information, if you are a local or know anything about the Gainesville tunnels in regards to the tornado or just their history in general, definitely let me know. But they're like pre-Civil War era tunnels, or that's cool.
They also had, lamp lighters, like where they would go around light lamps in the evenings. I think they used it for that too.
See, this is why you have to ask the locals, because then
And I'm not even a local. I didn't grow up here.
See, yeah, and you don't even have to grow up here, and like that's a kind of a known thing, I guess.
Yeah,
That's